A ton of new Big Navi information just leaked out online, and Nvidia should be really worried. Let's talk about it. Before that, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss another video. So over the past couple of days, a ton of people posted new information about Big Navi, and on top of that, new trademarks were found regarding this GPU. So at this point, I think we can pretty much nail down the final specs, and on top of that, I think I know what the performance and the release date for this 6900XT graphics card is going to be. So starting off with the specs though, first looking at the core count here, apparently the Big Navi 6900XT graphics card is going to have up to 80 compute units, and that's double what you can find in the 5700XT right now. Now this information comes from the YouTube channel Not an Apple Fan. If you're not subscribed to him, I do suggest you go ahead and click that link in the description below to go watch his full video and give him a subscription, because I know this guy personally. He's a great guy. I talk to him on Twitter, and I do follow him on YouTube as well, and he makes really great videos. They're very similar to mine, and I'm sure you would like them. But in any case, not only does he believe it's going to have 80 compute units, but it's also supposedly going to have a 2.2 gigahertz boost clock, which, let's be honest, the PS5 is able to hit up to 2.23 gigahertz, so this isn't too surprising, though it is a little bit surprising considering the fact that the PS5 GPU is only 36 compute units, while this is an 80 compute unit card, so we can expect that the TDP is probably going to rise quite a bit. And of course, that was confirmed by not only Not an Apple Fan, but apparently Red Gaming Tech also believes that it will hit 2.2 gigahertz, and I do as well. Now moving on to the memory bus here, according to Red Gaming Tech, and of course all these sources there will be links to in the description below so you can watch their original video or read the articles, but in any case, he believes it's going to be a 256-bit bus, which I was a little bit skeptical at first, because let's be honest, you know, the 5700XT has a 256-bit bus, so to get double the compute units and still have the same bus width sounds a little bit strange, but apparently that's going to be made up for by the fact that it's going to have not only a higher memory clock of 16 gigabits per second, and it will be 16 gigabytes of that, but that somewhat low bandwidth of 512 gigabytes per second on such a high-end card will be helped by the fact that it will have what RGT is calling an infinity cache, and this infinity cache is going to be apparently up to 128 megabytes, which honestly sounds almost a little bit too good to be true. Now, we don't know for sure if it's going to be, fully 128 megabytes or what it will end up being, but, you know, there was a recent leak that came out of a trademark that was filed by AMD over on the website justia.com. So it probably does exist in some way, shape, or form, but whether or not we'll see it in the final product is yet to be confirmed, and I would be a little bit surprised if this infinity cache is able to make up for the fact that, you know, if you look at the RTX 3090, it has over 900 gigabytes per second, and if this Big Navi GPU is supposed to be competing with, say, an RTX 3090, and it only has 512 gigabytes per second, well then that means that this infinity cache is going to have to alleviate about 400 gigabytes per second of a deficit between this 80 compute unit card and the RTX 3090 if it has any chance of trying to beat it or even match it. Moving on to the die size, apparently this thing, according to Cortex, who did share an actual image of the die itself, now the capacitors around it were taken from the 5700XT to protect his sources, but the die itself is supposedly real, and that die was measured by Cortex to be over 500 millimeters squared. In fact, he said it was 536 millimeters squared, though his measurements could be a little bit off because, let's be honest here, he doesn't have the actual sample on him. And finally, talking about the price, I think it's going to drop somewhere between $500 and $550. Now, that's a lot better than what Nvidia is giving you, especially if the performance does end up coming in at, you know, somewhere between, say, the 3080 and 3090 for the 6900XT. But to be honest with you guys, I think they could give you a little bit better price. I think they could actually sell it to you for like $400 and still make decent money, and everyone would be happy. But you know what? AMD's changed as a company in recent years, so they're a little bit more focused on making margin on their GPUs. They're probably not going to have these cards in super high volume, so making more on each individual card probably makes a whole lot more sense to them. And already at $550 for 16 gigabyte VRAM card that's potentially faster than the 3080, well, you know what? To get that level of price for that much performance, it's not too bad. And speaking of performance, let's try and figure out just how fast this card could be. So if we go ahead and we take the 5700XT as a baseline with its 40 compute units on the RDNA2 architecture, that thing gives us 9.75 teraflops of GPU performance. Now, if we take a look at the 6900XT, which has 80 compute units, all we have to do is we take that times 64 times 2, and then we take that times the clock speed of peak 2200 megahertz. Now, of course, the clock speed could be a little bit lower than that on the final retail model, but apparently, from what I'm hearing, hearing from several different sources that it's apparently going to have a boost clock of up to 2.2 gigahertz. So if we keep that in mind, well, then that means it's going to have 22.5 to 8 teraflops. But that's not taking into account the fact that it's going to have an IPC lift, as AMD confirmed themselves. So if we give it at least just, a 10% IPC lift, which it could be much higher than that, or it could be a little bit lower, we don't know for sure yet, but 10% is a pretty conservative value, so let's go ahead and give it that. Well, that makes it a 24.78 teraflop GPU, which is enormously high. In fact, it's 2.54 times faster than the 5700 XT if everything scales properly, which of course it might not, and in fact, nothing scales perfectly. Now, that sounds extremely fast, and it is, but to put it in perspective, let's go ahead and compare it to the 3090, and the best way to do that is to compare the 3090 to the 5700 XT, and if you do that, well, you'll find out that the 3090 should be just over 2 times faster in like 4K gaming performance. So if we keep that in mind and we compare that to the theoretical 6900 XT performance, assuming that that scales perfectly, which again, it won't, but if it did, well, you'd be looking at a GPU that's significantly faster than the 3090. You have the 6900 XT coming in at 2.54 times faster, whereas the 3090 is just only a little bit over 2 times faster. So yeah, in theory, the 6900 XT would easily smack the bejesus out of the 3090 in terms of 4K gaming performance, but that's only looking at a scenario where the 6900 XT scales perfectly, and let's be honest, it's probably not going to. In fact, I expect this 6900 XT to scale worse than a lot of us are expecting, and personally, I believe you'll probably see a card that lands somewhere between the 3080 and the 3090. I don't think it's going to end up beating the 3090, and I think a big part of that is the whole infinity cache thing, because although they could put a massive amount of cache on the die, in a lot of scenarios that would make up for the deficit completely, I think there's a lot of scenarios in which they're still going to see a little bit of bottlenecking going on. Now, I could be wrong, and it could honestly be an even better solution than giving it more bandwidth to the VRAM, but I have a feeling that there's going to be some issues with that, and I think the reason why they decided to go with that early on is because they didn't want to put a more power-hungry bus on the GPU. They didn't want to put really high-speed memory that's expensive and power-hungry on the GPU. And on top of that, they really couldn't get their hands on GDDR6X, I don't think, at least, because I believe that's an Nvidia exclusive technology. So I don't think AMD would actually even be able to get it if they wanted to. So I think they were kind of stuck in a situation where they pretty much had to choose between using like a 512-bit bus or HBM2 or designing some sort of new caching system. And I think when you have those solutions or those options on the table, you end up looking at them and you go, you know what? I think caching is the better option, even if it does make it so that we don't scale perfectly. So I think that's probably the reason why they went for that. But finally, let's go ahead and touch on that release date. And this was actually shared over on Twitter by the user Yuri Bubbly, and he's the guy who made the Ryzen DRAM calculator. And honestly, I find this guy pretty trustworthy. I don't think he just says things for no reason. And so I do have quite a bit of trust in him, and I do actually believe this. Now, what he said over on Twitter in response to video cards when they were asking him about Zen 3 was he told them the actual release date for Zen 3, which I covered in my previous video, but he also told them that, quote, Navi 2 15th through 20th of November. This is old information, but I can see that AMD has not adjusted the plans. So to me, that actually makes a whole lot of sense, actually, because if they go ahead and announce the GPUs on the 28th, I believe, well, then they're going to need a little bit of time to update their retailers with all of the new announcements that they make over at the event. And on top of that, they're going to need to give people time so that they can, stock up on GPUs and make sure they're ready, because I'm sure they saw the absolute disaster of the RTX 3080 launch and they want to try and avoid that. So I think that gives them enough time if they launch on, say, November 20th. I'm probably guessing that's when it's going to happen, to get enough GPUs to make sure everything goes smoothly. And so that, maybe some of us can actually get a GPU this time, because to this day, I'm still trying to get an RTX 3080. I'm trying to get one so I can do overclocking reviewing with it, and I just can't. I cannot do it. I can sit here and refresh pages. I can have notifications come to me. I'm signed up for the auto notify stuff, and I cannot get my hands in a 3080. So I hope AMD does a better job of this, and it seems like they're at least trying to. And on top of that, I do believe that one of the guys who works for AMD over on Twitter said that it wouldn't be a paper launch. So whether or not that means there's going to be wide availability, we don't know for sure yet, but at the very least, we know that they're not going to just be launching 20 cards. But hey, that's just what I think. What do you think the specs of the 6900 XT is going to be, and how fast do you think it's going to be as well? I'd love to see what you have to say in the comments below, and of course, I'll see you in the next video. If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to drop a like. Every time you do so, Nvidia and Intel drop prices. Also, if you want to see more, click here. You won't be disappointed.